But as promised on BBC Radio Manchester, I want to ask you this. Do you want to overcome your fear of spiders? Manchester University experts believe they may have a breakthrough after working with dozens of people who share your fears. Dr. Warren Mansell is a clinical psychologist and author of the research. Thanks for coming in, Warren, and especially on a day when you're heading off for a long weekend with your family. You've got out of the way, haven't you, essentially, to come and see us today. Just talk about phobias, if you would, first, as a generalisation. You know, I think we use the word phobia. We're not necessarily always using it in the correct way, are we?
Yeah. Fears of specific things, like certain animals, like spiders and snakes, are really common. And we sometimes call those phobias. That's fine. It's when they become particularly detrimental to a person's life, like they can't sleep in their own bedroom, or they can't go to certain parts of their own house because of their fears, and that's when it becomes a phobia that actually the person might want help with.
And it's no good just saying, pull yourself together, there's nothing in that room.
Exactly.
Get over it.
Exactly, and that's what our research shows, that the most important thing, it seems, for recovery, or for at least for improving, is one's own control over how one decides how near to get to that spider or that snake. So in the study, we had two groups of people with phobias, and we matched exactly how near and how large these images were on the screen. But in one group, they could control that, and the other group, they couldn't. And it was only in the group that could control it that actually improved their ability to get closer to a real spider.
So I gather you've called this perceptual control theory. We don't want to necessarily get into the academia side of it, but is that essentially what it is? It's the control.
Yeah, it's a very handy theory that's been around since the 1960s, but not been brought into a mental health sphere until quite recently. And it does focus on control being the essence of life, really, of who we are, that we just go around and we control things that matter to us, and that's what our behaviours are. They're the ways that we control things that matter to us, whether it be the colour you paint your bedroom, how close you want to be to a spider, or how confident you want to be when you're talking to a friend. All of those things we're controlling, we're trying to balance them all in our lives.
Right, you mentioned mental health there, which brings it into a different kind of level of perspective for me, because mental health over the last 3 or 4 months has been high on the news agenda, as it should be, and perhaps we've ignored elements of it for too long. Is this a mental health issue then?
Our clinical phobias are a mental health issue, but only when they become, you're particularly distressed about it, or it particularly gets in the way of what you want to or need to do in your life. So, in our study, nearly a third of the people had a clinical level of phobia, and these were people who couldn't go into their own shower because they were so afraid of a spider that they'd seen being in there. These were people that couldn't go out with friends camping or for picnics or on walks in the park because they were so afraid that there would be a spider there that would get them. So for those people, it was getting in the way of their lives, and that how much it affects people can vary from mild, moderate to sometimes some people can have phobias so severe that even the word can set them worrying.
Right. So this is, we're talking specifically about arachnophobia, but presumably the principle will transfer to the principle of control.
Yes. And
being in control will transfer to any phobia.
It applies to anything we do in life and anything we get distressed about. We get distressed about what we can't control.
Just talk a little bit more about what your participants were asked to do then.
Yeah, so that's important. We think a key part of it at the start was that they were all asked to list the reasons both for why they might want to avoid spiders, but also why they might want to face their fears. So we really got them to talk about their mixed motives, why they were in two minds about it, and to really kind of maybe think about it in a deeper way than they had done before. And then we just left it up entirely to them, or to half of them, how they moved, how they controlled their distance on the screen from the thing they were afraid of. The other half, we also left it entirely to them, but they didn't have the control. And that's where the differences came out. It was only the ones with control that then approached the spider closer after this intervention.
A real spider?
a real spider in a tank. Yeah.
Yeah, so how does it differ? Because in my mind, if you've got a fear of flying, for example, there are courses where you actually go flying.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a fear of spiders or anything else for that matter, snake, creatures, traditionally you would gradually be introduced to a creature and eventually let it rest on your arm or something.
Mm-hmm.
So have you taken it to a different level then, or have you just adapted the use of technology to help you with that principle?
Yeah, I think one thing we've done is we've emphasised how important it is for people to acknowledge that they're in two minds. We've also studied how important the control is, but because we had this bit of technology, people could control it in a very tight way, and we think that's what's most effective when people do what's called graded exposure.
Right.
It's how much the person themselves can sort of grade it, and they can step forward and they can come back, and they can do that. The more they can control that, which is obviously the technology helps, but it's not the only way you can do it. You could use kind of slightly bigger pictures that you would look at gradually, for example.
So you're helping them to develop a technique as well, I presume, and in the controlled atmosphere of your research, that would be one thing. When they go home and try and apply it, that was probably, is that the next level, and find out whether it does transfer into real life?
Yes, I mean, in the study, we found that 2 weeks later, the people that could control this distance actually avoided spiders less in their everyday life than the ones that in this short experiment couldn't control it. So that was really significant. But if this was an intervention we actually provided to people, we wouldn't just offer one session. We'd let the person decide how much they wanted to do it and when they wanted to do it. And we've got research that we've carried out in wider difficulties that again really place emphasis on the client, the person themselves, controlling things like how long they want their sessions, how often they want to come for. And that's what control theory tells us, is that the more you give people control, actually the better they learn to use it and the more purposeful their lives become.
Right. So it's a behaviour learning process as much as anything else.
Well, interestingly, it's not the behaviour that people learn, it's the behaviour that they use to control better. And they'll change their behaviour from second to second just to get what they want. And that's how it should be. That's how things are when things are working smoothly. We're flexible and we change what we do just to experience that just right feeling of, how we want our tone of voice, how we want to come across, how much how honest we want to be in a conversation, etc., etc.
It's fascinating stuff. But let's say we have a listener now who is arachnophobe and might be saying to themselves, that sounds great, fantastic, for those 30 or 40 or however many people you had on your in your research. What about me at home? What can I do? So therefore the question I'm imagining people are asking, what is the application of what you've learnt? So,
I mean, for example, I've written a self-help book, Coping Fears and Phobias, that operates on the same principles that we've been researching. People can go to their GP and ask explicitly for a psychological intervention for their anxiety, and there are psychological therapists within GP practice often that can help them. And then there's private companies like Nurture Psychology in Rochdale that provide courses and interventions for parents and children. So there's actually a lot available.
It's not inherited, presumably, is it?
Well, interesting. The fear of spiders, the fear of snakes, probably is something that we all have. We're all born with the potential for it.
Survival instinct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what makes it a phobia, what makes it actually a problem, is nothing to do with that. It's how you go through and balance that instinctive fear with all the other things you want to do in your life.
I've got a friend who has now been to Australia twice, but he's 50, and he avoided going to see family for, 30 years, because he was terrified of the poisonous snakes.
Well, it's quite reasonable in a way. Apparently in Australia they've banned the episode of Peppa Pig where she touches a spider because they are dangerous in Australia.
So the 2% of the 63,000 species, a bulk of them are in Australia, are they?
I don't know.
You don't know. I know you're not a zoologist.
I know there's quite a lot.
Or an insectologist or whatever it is. So what's your self-help book called?
Yeah,
you may as well get that plug in.
Yeah, no worries.
Now you've given up your Good Friday for us.
Yeah, it's called Coping with Fears and Phobias, and it's published by One World Publications, and it's on Amazon, and it's It's probably the best place to get hold of it.
By
There's
Dr.
also
Warren Mansell.
Yeah, there's also a website that has got some tools and techniques on it that's freely available as well if people Google it.
Google coping with fears and phobias.
And my name, yeah.
And your name, Warren Mansell.
Yeah.
Mansell.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. No, you're welcome. It's do people still go to hypnotherapists and try to be hypnotised out of it, for example, as far as you know?
People go to all kinds of methods to overcome phobias. What our research is about, what are the active ingredients so we can make it more efficient. And anything on the surface might be called something, but the root is if it helps you explore why you've got those problems more deeply and your conflict over them, and if it gives you a way to try and control your decisions about whether you approach or avoid that by yourself and you work through it yourself, and if that's what the therapist helps you do, then it'll work, whether it's called hypnotherapy or EMDR or cognitive therapy or behaviour therapy or whatever.
All right, great. Thanks, Warren. So if you Google Dr. Warren Mansell's name, all the associated work and books and websites will come up.
Far too much. Yeah.
That'll help. Now, I know you've got an Easter weekend to go and enjoy. Thanks very much for coming to see us this morning.
Thank you.